we are fine with. You did adopt at the first reading the annual cost of the audit of the LTSC shall not exceed $150,000 adjusted for inflation, and we concur with that change as well.
Mr. Chairman, just a brief observation. Weren't we going to change that to 110 because 110 is all that we were able to have available to us? That was the 10%.
1%.
Or 1% figure was 110,000.
I think the 1% related to administrative costs, not to administrative or audit.
Moving to page 12, section 2. The language in section 2 was modified to more or less correlate with the language dealing with the percentage of voting requirement from 55 to the 2/3, and I believe that was a requirement we decided by law that night, and of course we agree with that language change as well. Turning to page 13, paragraph 2. Dealing with public transit projects, that the 2%, HSC shall set aside 2% for public transit projects. The previous language allowed each individual agency, member agency, to, if they didn't have an appropriate project, to bring that back into the general fund, which we felt should be struck, as it, we think this is a good way of getting some extra vote on the ordinance, and so we agree with the fact that it has been struck in the first reading document. Further on page 13, and maybe quite honestly the largest stumbling block that we continue to have, new language was inserted to ensure the lowest possible cost of taxpayers and maximize accountability. And the remainder of that sentence, which is, in our opinion, and also in the opinion of, I believe, County Council a couple of weeks ago, when I asked the question whether it more or less still allows, through the Roads Commissioner status, for the county to unilaterally use force account or day labor on projects. They concurred last night that it did, and we still find it we still have an exception with this particular clause. We have met with different stakeholders in the last couple of weeks to try and work out new language in this regard, but in the end we have not been successful in introducing any new language into the document, to my knowledge, unless it's in one of these packages of the same meeting. I'm not sure if it is or not. So we still we have exception to that, and can only fall back on the suggested language in the COLAB documents, which have been the same, more or less, language of the past few months, I suppose. And I believe those were the only changes. So that concludes my remarks of our opinion on this.
Thank you. Any questions?
I'd be happy to answer questions. Yield, Mr. Root.
Right. We'll probably, I'm sure you'll be back over here. Mike Root, County Council. I think that all of the changes that I just heard listed have been made except for about 3. And so let me point these out. In the packages before you, you have the first ordinance, which is called the current ordinance in my package, and all of the changes except for about 3 that have been proposed tonight. And so let's go over those and make sure that you understand them. The first current ordinance is the one that was approved last meeting, and that's the version that was approved with many of the changes that you just heard enumerated again tonight by Mr. Floyd. We tried to incorporate those in because those were approved when you discussed this at your last meeting. So there were 2 that were not included, and so we've included that. The first change is option 1, and that is on page 5 of the package in front of you. And it's basically the current ordinance that was approved at your last meeting, but on page 5, what we've done is include that word program that Mr. Fleur just suggested be included at paragraph B. That's the second paragraph down on that page. So it says that the LTFC shall supervise annual fiscal program and periodic performance audits, etc. So that's the change he just proposed tonight, and we hadn't gone over that at the last meeting. We don't see it as, well, it is a significant change. It would include the LTFC actually doing what these words say, supervising not only fiscal and periodic performance, but fiscal program and periodic performance audits. And so I think it's important that when I stop explaining these, that we have Mr. Fleur again explain to you what he means by program. Whether we put a comma after the word fiscal and before program makes a little difference in the significance of program. If we just say annual fiscal program and periodic performance audits, that's one thing. If we say annual fiscal, comma, program and periodic performance audits, then the program gets a little more significance, I think. And so it's important that we go over that and understand exactly what it is that we're all meaning the word program to include. If you include that, I don't see it as significantly making a difference in this. I think it will make, it will make a difference, but I don't have a strong objection to it.
In essence, what you're saying is that COLAB's wish is to cover all bases in reference to the expansion of the wording to include program, and that based on the funding source or the funding mechanisms involved within the 40-year cycle, that some road projects could be labeled as programs. And so to be able to follow the correct protocol and process in applying for those funds and putting those funds to work, I can see his point. It's a valid point, and it's not a deal breaker, and we can move on to the next item.
I agree. If I can go on to the second new proposed change that I heard tonight, and that's one that we did have some knowledge that would be proposed. So it's in option 2, again on page 5. So if you go to the option 2 in your package in front of you, and on page 5 of that, again at paragraph, first of all, just to point out, on paragraph B, you'll see the word program again still in there. That's the one we just talked about. It's underlined. And then below it, in paragraph C on page 5, and then we have a deletion of about 6 words here. So the concurrence and the approval of the authority is deleted in this paragraph. And that's another request that Mr. Floyd made tonight, and we had knowledge that that would be proposed tonight, so we've given you this as an option. So paragraph C has the role of financial and performance audits. It talks about the LGSC shall, under the competitive procurement rules of the authority and with the active involvement of the authority, executive director, comma, and then we're taking out the concurrence and approval of the authority. So it would not have to have that if we delete these words. Then it says it will select a professional auditor. So basically what this does is allow the LPSC a little more discretion in selecting that auditor, and it doesn't have to come back and get the approval of this board.
Mr. Wood, on that, and perhaps Mr. Burnett, when we advertise for auditors, how many bids do we get? And they're required to have special insurance or something like this. How many have we normally had to apply?
The last time we had this go out, I think we only received 2 bids.
So we're talking about two bids, and then they cannot do it for 3 times in a row.
After the 3rd time, you can't do it for the 4th.
They can't, right. So really, we're not talking about a whole lot of competition here. And by the time they follow the government accounting procedures, and also they follow, GASB and everything else,